My coworker pulled me aside one afternoon, worry written all over her face, and asked if I was okay. That question surprised me because I looked fine. Nothing about me looked like a person in crisis. But then I understood. She had noticed I never joined the team for lunch. She had noticed I packed the same simple meal almost every single day. She had noticed I skipped the weekend trips, the happy hours, the group dinners everyone else treated as normal. And she had definitely noticed my car, the oldest one in that parking lot by at least a decade. She thought she was looking at someone falling behind. Here's the irony. My salary was the same as hers, smaller than some of theirs actually, and yet I had more than any of them. The day before that conversation, at 25 years old, I had opened my investment account and seen a number sitting there, $114,387, built on a salary that never crossed $50,000 a year. From the outside, my life looked like less. From the inside, it was already more. I need to say this clearly, right at the start, nobody handed me that money. There was no inheritance sitting quietly in the background, no stock that exploded, no side income nobody knew about. I started with a salary of $47,000, a small balance left over from school, and absolutely no advantage the people around me did not also have. What I had was 30 habits, 30 small, unglamorous decisions that most people either overlook or quietly judge. I am not a financial advisor, and this is not a recommendation. This is simply what happened across 3 years, starting from a completely ordinary place. This was not about income. It was never about income. It was about what I did with every dollar before I had the chance to miss it. Most people are fighting the paycheck illusion, the belief that a bigger number arriving in your account means a bigger life is automatically happening for you. It is not. What happens to that number in the first few days after it lands is the entire story. I built 30 small habits, most of them boring, some of them almost invisible, and let them run quietly in the background while everyone around me focused on the number at the top of the paycheck instead of what happened to it after. Here's where it starts. Habit 1. I paid myself before I let myself spend. I set this up during my second week of work, sitting on my bed with my laptop. On the 1st and the 15th of every month, $600 moved out of my checking account on autopilot and into my retirement and investment accounts. Time to land right after each paycheck cleared. I did it before I had furniture, before I had a routine, before I could talk myself out of it. A coworker down the hall told me she planned to start investing once she had extra left over at the end of the month. 3 years later, she still had not started because there is never extra left over at the end of the month. There's only what remains after everything else takes its turn first. That money was never part of my spending picture since it left before I ever noticed it arrive. Vanguard's most recent How America Saves report found that workers on automatic contribution plans end up saving at nearly twice the rate of people handling it manually, largely because the whole process happens without anyone needing to remember, decide, or feel motivated that day. Discipline was not the requirement. A single decision made once was enough to make discipline unnecessary. Habit 2. I took every free retirement dollar I could get my employer match 50% of the first 6% I contributed. On a $47,000 salary, that meant setting aside roughly $235 a month to receive an extra $118 a month in return. Money that required nothing from me except checking one box on a form during orientation. That is over $1,400 a year in compensation. Most people quietly decline without realizing it. Fidelity's most recent retirement analysis found that a meaningful share of employees still fail to contribute enough to capture their full match, even when the money is sitting right there waiting to be claimed. Invested at 10% over 30 years, that missed $1,400 a year alone would have grown to roughly $233,000. A coworker once told me she could not afford to contribute enough to capture the full match. She was not saving money by skipping it. She was declining a raise she had already earned and simply never collected. Habit 3. I opened the account my future self needed. I opened a Roth IRA before my first paycheck had even cleared, sitting in my car in the parking lot of the bank because I did not trust myself to wait until I got home and lost momentum. I contributed roughly $300 a month into a total market index fund with almost no fees attached. I never picked stocks. I never watched the account daily. I checked it maybe once a quarter, watching a number grow that required nothing new from me each time I looked. Habit 4, I bought the market instead of chasing hype. While people at work traded stories about a stock that was about to take off, I kept buying the same boring index fund every month, regardless of what the news said that week. A stock that gains 40% and then loses 60% makes an excellent story at a party. It does not make a retirement. S&P Dow Jones Indices' most recent SPIVA scorecard found that 79% of actively managed large cap funds underperformed the S&P 500 in a single year, and over 20 years, that underperformance rate climbs above 90%. Over those same 3 years, two coworkers who chased individual stock tips ended up close to even after accounting for the ones that collapsed. My boring fund simply kept climbing quarter after quarter without a single dramatic headline attached to it. Boring one, it usually does. Habit 5, I treated extra money like seed, not spending money. A tax refund of $1,100 arrived one spring, and I remember standing in my kitchen deciding before I even opened the direct deposit notification that it was already spoken for. A freelance project paid me $400 later that year. Birthday cash from relatives added up to around $200 across 12 months. A friend of mine received a similar refund that same spring and used hers on a weekend trip. Mine went straight into my brokerage account because $1 from a refund spends exactly the same as $1 from a paycheck and compounds exactly the same way too. Behavioral economists have a name for the habit of treating unexpected money differently from earned money. They call it mental accounting, and I made a point of ignoring it completely. Habit 6, I kept my emergency fund where it could still grow. My emergency fund sat in a high yield savings account earning close to 4.5% instead of the traditional account my parents had always used. Bank rates national average for a standard savings account sits around 0.5%, a gap most people never bother to close. Same safety. Same instant access the one time I actually needed it, when my car needed an unexpected repair. The only difference was where I chose to store money that was already mine, and that single choice earned close to $900 extra over 3 years, quietly, without me doing anything except picking the right bank. Habit 7, I made every dollar confess. Where it went for one full month, I wrote down every purchase in a small notebook before bed. No apps, just pen and paper, because I wanted to know if my spending matched what I assumed it was. By the end of that month, I had uncovered over $60 in charges I had genuinely forgotten existed, a subscription I no longer used, a recurring delivery fee that had quietly renewed twice. Writing something down forces your brain to process it twice, once in the moment of spending and once again at night. Consumer surveys on budget and behavior consistently find that people who track spending manually report far more confidence in reaching their savings goals than people who never track at all. That second look is where most of the leaks get caught, and mine alone added up to over $700 a year once I stopped them. Habit 8, I gave every dollar a job before the month started. Before the first day of any month, every dollar I expected to earn already had an assignment: rent, groceries, insurance, transportation, investments, and one small cash allowance. My roommate operated the opposite way, spending freely until the middle of the month and then scrambling for the second half. If a category ran short for me, I pulled from another one on purpose with a clear decision behind it. Instead of discovering the shortfall by accident, a budget built this way never felt like a leash. It felt like a plan I had already agreed to before the month had a chance to talk me out of it. Habit 9, I knew exactly why I was being frugal. None of this held together without a real reason behind it. Mine was simple and specific. I wanted the ability to walk away from a job the moment it stopped being worth it, without needing anyone's permission and without panicking about rent. I wrote that reason on a sticky note and kept it on my mirror for the entire 3 years. Frugality without a clear reason turns into deprivation, and deprivation does not last more than a few weeks. Frugality attached to a real reason turns into a plan you keep returning to, especially on the days it would have been easier to quit. Habit 10. I live below what I thought I needed for years. I assumed I needed more space, a newer car, a slightly nicer neighborhood, the way most people assume these things without ever testing the assumption. A friend of mine upgraded her apartment the same year I chose to stay in mine, convinced the extra bedroom would finally make her feel settled. 18 months later, she admitted she barely used the space. When I actually lived with less than I assumed I required, almost nothing about my daily life suffered in any way I could point to. What changed was the amount left over every single month to invest, and that number, repeated for 3 years straight, mattered far more than the upgrade ever would have. Habit 11. I stopped outsourcing my everyday meals. Delivery and takeout had quietly become my default during my first few months of working, running close to $18 a meal, 4 or 5 times most weeks, because cooking after a long day felt like one decision too many. That same packed lunch my coworker noticed me carrying every day was actually the turning point away from all of it. That works out to nearly $400 a month disappearing into convenience. Cooking most of my own meals dropped my food costs to under $200 a month, a gap of roughly $200 every month, close to $2,400 a year. Invested at 10% over 20 years, that gap alone becomes close to $137,000. The meals themselves tasted almost identical. Only one version of them built a future, and the other one just built a pile of receipts. Habit 12. I cooked before tiredness could make decisions. Every Sunday afternoon, I spent about 90 minutes preparing 3 large meals that carried me through most weeknight dinners, because I had learned exactly what happens to my judgment by 8 in the evening after a long day. Tired me makes expensive decisions almost every time. Prepared me never had to choose anything in that moment, because the choice had already been made 2 days earlier by a version of me with far better judgment and a much clearer head. Habit 13. I changed my grocery store. Before I changed my budget, I noticed the exact same items, same brands, cost close to 30% more at the grocery store nearest my apartment than at one 15 minutes further away, after a coworker mentioned she always drove the extra distance for exactly that reason. Switching stores alone, without changing a single item on my list, saved me roughly $50 a month, over $500 a year, for the effort of driving a slightly longer route once a week. Habit 14. I stopped drinking my future wealth. A daily coffee shop habit was costing me close to $140 a month before I actually added it up one evening out of curiosity. Making coffee at home, including the beans and equipment, dropped that number to around $20, a difference of close to $1,400 a year. Invested at 10% over 20 years, that gap alone grows to roughly $82,000. A friend who kept her daily coffee run going the entire 3 years spent close to $5,000 on it by the time I stopped counting. I did not give up coffee. I gave up paying someone else $4 to hand me something I could make myself in under 5 minutes, and redirected the difference every single month for 3 years straight. Habit 15. I made social eating cheaper without making it sad. I still went out with friends. I simply went less often, and I ordered the $14 dish instead of the $30 one most nights, a habit I picked up after watching a friend rack up credit card debt from dinners she could not quite afford, but ordered anyway. Nobody at the table ever noticed the difference in what I ordered. My brokerage account noticed every single time, quietly in the background, the way most good financial decisions go unnoticed by everyone except the person making them. Something is worth clarifying here, because I can guess how this might be landing. It may sound like 3 years of constant refusal, sitting home alone while everyone else went out and lived. That is not what happened. I had dinners with friends. I took a short trip once a year that I actually look forward to. I had hobbies that cost almost nothing and filled my evenings completely. What separated my daily life from everyone else's was almost never about quality. It was the price tag attached to getting there, and I got very good at finding the version of a good life that did not come with a bill I would regret a decade later. Habit 16, I put a ceiling on my housing costs. I refuse to let rent pass 25% of my take home pay, even though most guidance says 30 is acceptable. On roughly $2,800 a month after taxes, that ceiling landed at $700. I found a place for $685 while several friends paid over $1,100 for something newer in a trendier part of town, the kind of place with a name people recognize when you mentioned it. That monthly gap of roughly $450 invested at 10% over 20 years is worth close to $309,000. My apartment did not have a dishwasher or hardwood floors. It had a functioning kitchen and a door that closed securely. Anything beyond that was optional, and I treated it that way. Habit 17. I shrunk the biggest bill in my life. Beyond keeping rent low to begin with, I took on a roommate for about 18 months specifically to cut my housing costs even further, splitting rent and utilities down the middle after realizing the extra bedroom was doing nothing but collecting dust. That decision alone freed up close to $5,000 over its run, money that went directly into my brokerage account instead of into square footage I barely used outside of sleeping. Habit 18, I drove the car that built wealth, not the car that performed wealth. That car in the parking lot, the one that made my coworker worry, was a used sedan I had bought with cash for $7,200, and I kept it for almost the entire 3 years without ever financing something newer, even after watching a coworker sign a lease on a car that cost more per month than my rent. Adding insurance, gas, and upkeep together, my total yearly cost for that car landed around $3,200. Experience data for early 2026 puts the typical new car payment at $770 every month, which alone totals more than $9,000 a year. And that figure does not even include fuel or coverage. The gap between my total cost and that average payment came to roughly $6,000 a year. Invested at 10% over 30 years, that difference alone is worth just under $1 million. Nobody at a red light can see what is sitting in a brokerage account. They can only see the car, and the car was never the point. Habit 19. I kept my phone until it actually needed replacing. I used the same phone through the entire 3 years, while people around me upgraded on every new release, including a coworker who financed a new one every single year without fail. Over that stretch, I saved somewhere close to $3,000 compared to someone financing a new device every year or two. The phone made calls, it sent messages, it ran every app I actually needed. It did not have the newest camera, and I never once missed it, or the payment plan that came attached to it. Habit 20. I repaired things before I replaced them. A torn bag strap that I sewed myself with a needle I borrowed from a neighbor. A wobbling chair leg I tightened instead of hauling the chair to the curb. A cracked phone screen protector I replaced for $6 instead of an entire screen. That would have cost close to $200. A friend of mine replaced her blender the moment it started making an odd noise, when a $15 part would have fixed it completely. Repairing instead of replacing rarely costs more than $30 or $40 across a year for me, compared to hundreds spent replacing things that still had plenty of life left in them. Habit 21. I put a fence around fun, money. Twice a month, I pulled $150 in cash for anything discretionary, dining out, small purchases, anything that was not a fixed bill, a system I built after realizing my card made spending feel weightless in a way cash never did. Researchers call this the pain of paying, the discomfort of physically watching money leave your hand. One widely cited grocery store study found shoppers paying cash spent about $6.65 per visit, while shoppers paying by credit spent close to $11.45 for the exact same trip. When that cash ran out, spending stopped until the next cycle. I never quietly moved money over from savings to patch the gap. The limit removed the need to negotiate with myself in the moment, which is the moment most budgets quietly fail. Habit 22. I let someone else pay full price. First, almost everything in my apartment, furniture, kitchen supplies, even my desk, came secondhand through local marketplace listings and a neighbor's moving sale I happened to catch on a Saturday morning. My entire apartment cost under $700 to furnish completely. A coworker furnishing a similar space brand new spent over $5,000, most of it financed through a store card she was still paying off a year later. That difference went straight into my Roth IRA the same month I moved in. A single decision worth thousands made in one afternoon of driving around with a borrowed truck. Habit 23. I borrowed things I only needed once. A drill I used exactly one time to hang two picture frames. A cooler I needed for a single weekend camping trip. A local sharing group let me borrow both instead of buying either, the same group a friend of mine had never heard of, despite living 2 streets away and owning 3 drills she used once each. That habit alone saved me roughly $150 across a year on items that would have sat in a closet collecting dust after their one use. Habit 24. I made desire wait before it got my money. Anything over $40 had to sit on a list for 24 hours before I was allowed to buy it, a rule I built after buying something on a whim that sat in its box for 2 months before I even opened it. Most of the time, I forgot about it entirely before the day was over. Psychologists call this the hot-cold empathy gap, the tendency to badly misjudge how we will feel later while we are still caught in the heat of wanting something right now. Slick Deal's annual consumer survey found that the average American makes close to 10 unplanned purchases every single month. My version of that same habit dropped closer to 2 a month, simply because the 24 hours gave the urgency time to fade before my money did. Habit 25. I stopped letting stores enter my inbox. Marketing emails are engineered on purpose by people whose entire job is nudging you toward purchases you had no intention of making, a fact I only really absorbed after noticing one land in my inbox minutes after browsing a site. I unsubscribed from every single one the moment it arrived. A few months in, my inbox held nothing but real messages, and the constant nudge to buy something simply disappeared because I had removed the trigger entirely, while a coworker's inbox kept filling with the same offers she complained about every week. Habit 26. I made online shopping annoying on purpose. I deleted every shopping app from my phone entirely after noticing how differently I shopped on my phone at 11 at night compared to how I shopped sitting at a laptop in daylight. Buying anything meant opening a laptop, logging in, and typing in a website manually. One well-known study found that removing friction entirely, the kind of one-click purchasing major retailers now offer, boosted conversion rates by 5 to 10%. Adding that same friction back eliminated a comparable share of my impulse purchases before they ever happened, because the purchase had to survive the mild inconvenience of actually completing it, and most desires quietly did not survive that walk to the laptop. Habit 27. I stopped buying things just to feel something. I used to buy small, forgettable things whenever I was bored: a candle, a phone case, something under $20 that felt harmless in the moment. Not because I needed them, but because buying something felt like doing something. A Lending Tree survey found that close to half of consumers shop specifically to improve their mood, chasing the small dopamine lift a new purchase provides. Once I noticed that pattern clearly, sitting on my floor one evening surrounded by things I could not remember purchasing, most of that spending stopped almost on its own. Everything I owned afterward was something I actually used, and everything I actually used was the only thing worth keeping around. Habit 28. I reset my spending before it became my identity. Once a quarter, I ran a strict no spend week, covering only true essentials like rent and groceries. A practice I started after a particularly expensive month left me uneasy about how easily money had slipped away without a single big purchase to blame it on. The money saved during that single week was never really the point. The point was seeing clearly, without any excuses, exactly how much of my normal spending ran on pure habit instead of genuine need. Habit 29. I asked my bills to defend their price. Once a year, I called my insurance provider and my phone carrier and told them plainly that I was considering switching, a habit I picked up after a coworker mentioned she'd never once called to negotiate in 5 years with the same provider. Most of the time, they lowered my price rather than lose me as a customer. A Value Penguin study found that many shoppers who compared auto insurance rates saved money, with those who saved cutting their premiums by an average of nearly $400 a year. My own calls took under an hour combined and saved me close to $400 a year, which works out to roughly $400 an hour in effective return for a conversation most people never bother to have. Habit 30. I protected my health like it was part of my net worth. I treated sleep, movement, and simple home-cooked meals as financial decisions, not just wellness ones. After watching a coworker's unexpected medical bill erase almost a full year of careful saving in a single season. Medical debt remains one of the leading causes of bankruptcy in America, with over 500,000 bankruptcy cases each year linked at least partly to medical bills or illness-related work loss. Walking, cooking, and sleeping enough cost nothing, and they protected the one asset that made every other habit on this list possible in the first place: the simple ability to keep showing up and keep the system running. Now let's break down the number. Here's where the $114,387 actually came from, because I think the transparency matters more than the number itself. My retirement contributions and employer match over 3 years added up to roughly $26,000. My Roth IRA contributions totaled close to $11,000. Additional brokerage investments built from the housing savings, the car decision, the roommate, the coffee, the cooking, the furniture, the bill negotiation, and windfall money came to roughly $50,000. Market growth across all of those accounts during the 3 years added close to $14,000. My high yield emergency fund sat around $7,000. Cash from selling secondhand items, side income, and small savings added another $4,000 or so. The rest, close to $2,400, came simply from the compounding of everything so moving at once, quietly, for 3 years straight. Retirement contributions, the match, the raw, the brokerage account, market growth, the emergency fund, and the cash all together came to approximately $114,387. Almost none of that came from a high salary. It came from 30 habits nobody at that office would have photographed. So here's what it actually means. Here's the part that makes every one of these habits worth it. That number, invested at 10% average returns from age 25 to 65, becomes roughly $5.2 million without adding another cent, just from existing, just from compounding quietly for decades. Continuing that same $400 monthly habit across those same 40 years adds close to $2.1 million more. Put both of those together, and the total lands somewhere close to $7.3 million by age 65. The seed was never the destination. It was the starting point time was waiting to work on. But here is the part that makes it last. These 30 habits only work because I understood why they worked, not just what to do. Anyone can be told to pack a lunch. Almost nobody sticks with it because a sandwich does not feel urgent. But once you understand that the same gap from habit 11, packing instead of buying, invested for 20 years, is worth close to $137,000, the sandwich stops feeling optional. That understanding is financial literacy, and it is the actual engine behind every habit on this list. Without it, these are 30 chores you will abandon in 3 weeks. With it, they become the only decisions that ever made sense. Now zoom out to the decade ahead. The part nobody tells you at 25 is that the habits that protect you in your 20s are not the same ones waiting to test you later. The 30s bring the first real raise, and with it, the quiet pressure to finally live like the raise implies. The 40s bring a house that the bank approves for more than it should, and a mortgage payment that eats the very margin these habits build. The 50s bring the temptation to undersave during the exact year's income finally peaks because life has gotten expensive in ways that feel unavoidable. Each decade has its own version of the trap I'm avoiding right now. I cannot see all of them yet, but I know they are coming, and knowing that is half the defense. The habits got me here. Expecting the next trap is what keeps the number growing instead of quietly disappearing the way it does for almost everyone else. My coworker still does not know what that account looks like today. She never asked again after that afternoon, and I never brought it up myself. But I think about that moment often because it captures the entire truth of building wealth quietly. From the outside, my life looks smaller than everyone else's around that office. From the inside, it was already ahead of almost all of them. That number did not arrive from a raise, a windfall, or a lucky year in the market. It came from 30 small decisions, repeated without much drama, for 3 years, until the math finally caught up to the effort behind it. Nobody watches a person pack a lunch and assumes they are quietly building six figures. Nobody sees an old car in a parking lot and assumes the driver is already ahead of everyone around them. That is exactly why it works. It only needs time and 30 decisions willing to run in the background long enough to become undeniable.